Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming today. Please let me know, friends on Zoom, if you guys are having trouble at any point hearing or need something repeated, just drop a comment in the chat or raise your hand and I will try to keep up with that. In general, so in case you just cold showed up to this and have no idea what you're in for, the goal of this talk is to provide kind of a high-level overview of the history of extraterrestrial contact. And with a subject like this, which is, very taboo, unfortunately, in our society, and very has inherent documentation problems, all of the information that I'll be sharing is, there's various levels of well documented or, but without further ado, here's my first slide. Is a big grain of salt for everybody. Everybody gets to take an entire spoonful of salt with everything that is said today. And you can take as much of the salt as you want. It's going to be here the whole time. So before we get started, I was wondering if maybe we could do a show of hands of how many people this is their first time ever really looking into extraterrestrials. Any hands? Okay, and feel free to raise your hand on Zoom too if you want to. I'll switch to this view if we can. Oh, I don't know if that's showing everybody either. Okay, raise your hand if you've ever seen a UFO or a light in the sky. That is weird. Okay, a weird light in the sky, you guys. Okay, all right. For the folks on Zoom, we got maybe 50% of the people over here raise their hands for that. Raise your hand if you've ever think that you've come into face-to-face contact with an extraterrestrial or spoken, however, with an extraterrestrial entity. Any hands? Okay, awesome. And now we got about maybe 2/3 of the folks here raise their hands for that. Okay, so that's good. I'm just doing that so that I can kind of get an idea of where we're all sitting. Sounds like we don't have any real totally new beginners to this subject, and we've got a few definite veterans here with us. So in general, as I'm going through these slides, I know that I'm going to be covering a lot of material, and I'm going to try to cover it at a very high level relatively quickly, because this space is very fraught with lots of ideas. Let's call them many fun ideas. Everybody's got their own special ideas of what's going on. So I'm going to just try to give a high level overview of, the belief space of this area. So I'm not going to be able to cover everything, and I'm going to cover things very quickly at a high level, but I've engineered in different spots for questions. So if you do have a question of something I cover, write it down or make a little note and save it until the next question mark comes up, and then we'll take a big pause and we'll take any questions if there are any. Okay. So let's go forward. Here's our little roadmap for our little presentation. Oh, look at the cute cartoons. First, we're going to talk about the ancient past and what people believe in what they call ancient alien theory or ancient astronaut theory, what people believe about extraterrestrials contacting humans in the ancient past. Then we're going to talk about basically everything that happened from the ancient past to like the World War II era, because a lot of stuff happened, or people think that a lot of different things happened during World War II. So we'll very briefly cover kind of World War II, pre and post the war. Then we'll go into the most famous UFO contact incidents of all time, which there's like 3 or 4 that I'll cover at a very high level. And then we'll just do a quick wrap up of kind of like what are some of the beliefs today, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So first, we'll dive into the ancient alien stuff, and we'll start out with this quote. This is a really famous quote that probably many people have heard before. It's, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." And that's an Arthur C. Clarke quote, so famous science fiction and fantasy author. And this quote is used a lot in kind of extraterrestrial and conspiracy theorist circles, because it sort of speaks to this idea, which now here's another version of this quote, which is, any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial intelligence is indistinguishable from God. So people use this kind of quote to as the basis of ancient astronaut and ancient alien theory. Just to kind of, that's the sort of the starter, and now we'll dive into the main things that people point to in ancient astronaut theory. So the first thing is that in many ancient traditions, religions, and spiritual traditions, and just mythologies, it's all talking about superpower beings from the sky. You know, we've got it from all over the world. This is, I'll just go from left to right here. This is a biblically accurate angel. This is a modern depiction of description of an angel from the Bible. So it has like 12 eyes and has, you know, all these wings. So we've got Bible, we've got angels like this from Catholic traditions. Here's Hermes and the Greek gods, also sky dwelling superpowered beings. This is probably Isis, but also in Egyptian traditions, superpowered beings from the sky. This is, I think this is Ahura Mazda, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good. I remember that. Yes, so this is a Sumerian or Syrian god, but this is actually, this specific depiction is seen in a lot of different traditions of this kind of side-facing man with the wings, and he's got things in his hands, and you'll see him holding different things, but there's several, a lot of different gods that are seen like this. But again, superpower guy with wings who's coming down and doing things with humans. This is the oldest ever found depiction of a dragon from China. This is a roof tile, a Chinese roof tile that's dated to 4,500 to 3,000 BCE. So I put this in here to show that not all of the depictions of superpowered beings, they're not necessarily human form superpowered beings. There's also, you know, these dragons. And then this is a being called a Dagon, which is a fish god, and he's always depicted as an upright fish. And there's a couple different things, and so people speculate of, oh, this could be, you know, mermaids or aquatic beings, but again, a superpowered being that is interacting with humans and is clearly being depicted as a non-human type of thing. And then this last one here is the Anunnaki, who are the most famous, or I don't know if the most famous, but very famous ancient gods, as speculated to be extraterrestrials. And again, they're depicted as winged. And one thing I wanted to bring up here is that in this, you can call it alternative research circles, or as well as just in mainstream archaeology, it's thought that depictions of this time, it's like they didn't always have written language when they were making these depictions. So instead of being able to write like the god flew away, they would just put wings on it to show that the thing was capable of flight. So all of these wings are not necessarily saying, hey, this being actually had physical wings. It could be also just saying, okay, this is something that could fly, right? And I put this little asterisk here of helping humanity, because a lot of these stories, as I'm sure you guys already know, that we were not always being helped by the superpower beings. I mean, there's things that are in the Bible of what God was, you know, God's wrath, and across a lot of traditions, there's accounts of these beings from the sky not necessarily always being benevolent and helping us. And specifically in the Book of Enoch, which is a somewhat contested biblical text, there's accounts of the Watchers, which are these angels that came down and actually mated with humans and created this half divine, half human offspring. So they're helping humanity is sort of a, you know, not necessarily all the way. So going into my favorite sort of thing that you can find in ancient texts is, as a flying thing, is this idea of vimanas, which are in the Hindu and Sanskrit texts. It's these accounts of these flying chariots of the gods, and they're literally, you know, depicted as and described as these cylindrical or round palaces that are flaming palaces that would carry the gods up to heaven. And if that's not a spaceship, you know, I don't know what is. Or that's just one interpretation anyways. But I think that's an interesting one. And so moving on, so we covered kind of the gods in general, and vimanas, and now looking a little closely, these are petroglyphs, which are kind of the collective umbrella term for any kind of art that was left onto a rock face, are petroglyphs. And these ones are here on the left are from the American Southwest and like the Moab areas. And people have various speculations about these depictions. The Hopi Native Americans have a very cool legend about the ant people that led them underground in the time of the tumultuous time on the earth, and they lived underground in caves, and then they were led up, and so people speculate that some of these could be depictions of the ant people of the Hopi. These ones in the middle are from an area which is called, I think it's Wangina, or I'm not totally sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's a Aboriginal Australian tribe that has created petroglyphs of this nature. And so these have been widely speculated to be depictions of extraterrestrials. And then these last ones here, these are actually geoglyphs, which the difference between a petroglyph and a geoglyph is that a geoglyph is a large scale thing. And these are called the Nazca lines in Peru. And they were undiscovered for years and years. And then finally, I think the story was that somebody went up onto a mountaintop and was climbing up a mountain, and only from that vantage point they could then look over and see. And because when up close or at eye level, you cannot see them at all. It just looks like rocks, and these are like rocky, sort of arid hills and plains. So the whole idea that, okay, this is art that was created to be seen from the sky, you know. So this is another thing that many people who are looking into this theory or advancing this ancient astronaut theory are pointing to, is these geoglyphs and petroglyphs. So, and then we have, of course, you know, these huge lithic monuments, megalithic sites all over the world. And these are just a few, you know, pyramids. And I'm not going to go deeply into this, but there are people who sort of look very deeply into the numerology behind the architecture of some of these sites. For example, this one here is Chichen Itza, which has a lot of different astrological numerology built into the actual, you know, like there's a certain number of levels and the levels are exactly this high, and people do the same thing with the Great Pyramid. It's something like, I think the square, I forget exactly what it is, but there's a lot of numerology that people speculate behind the Great Pyramid of something like the speed of light out to 8 decimal points is the like the base times the height, or something like that. It's there's new numbers really encoded into the Great Pyramid, and people really there's been a lot of deep research into that, and some things with the Sphinx as well. But I'm not going to kind of go deeply into this, just wanting to kind of cover at a high level to look at the kind of high level of the space. And so now actually about the construction of the sites itself, this is one of my favorite sites. This is Sacsayhuaman in Cusco, Peru, which is a very ancient fortress attributed to the Incans. And it's got this amazing geology or architecture of these kind of seemingly perfectly cut out stones, right? And here's a couple pictures. There's me for scale. I was standing here in front of this wall, which doesn't have the biggest stones, but you can see in this picture how the stones are kind of turning this corner, which was another thing that's interesting. And then here's another picture of somebody standing next to one of the biggest stones. So these stones are no joke, you know, they're cutting big stones. So yeah, just kind of wanted to show you guys that one because I think it's so cool. And so now one of the last things that people talk about in the ancient alien theory or the ancient contact is elongated skulls, which again has been something that has gone across many traditions. And people point to the Pope being, now he's wearing the elongated hat, and it's a sign of, you know, whatever. It's a sign of the occult. You know, the Pope really knows about the aliens because he's wearing this tall hat, right? So it's just it's interesting, you know. Of course, there's red yarn all over the map from every direction. But I did want to point out, so these ones here are called the Paracas skulls, and most of the elongated skulls in the world have been found in Peru, in the Paracas region of Peru. But this is actually a statue from Egypt. But this is also a Paracas skull here. And some of the Paracas elongated skulls have been found with red hair. Like this guy actually is like a ginger hair. It looked kind of black, but it would be like a bright red hair in life. Which has also kind of led into this theory that people have about these red-headed giant race that was alive at some point. And possibly had something to do with, you know, the various ancient civilizations in that time period. So just wanted to call that out to give you guys kind of, as we're talking about this whole idea landscape here, there are red-headed giants apparently. Okay, so I wanted to take a minute to talk about this. I'm sure that some people have kind of heard of like ancient alien theories pretty much canceled, right? Like, or some people maybe have heard that it's a very problematic idea. And I wanted to talk about this because this is something that is widely critiqued about this theory, is that the theory is basically saying that, you know, oh, brown people couldn't build the pyramids, and it's taking away credit from indigenous groups for the amazing monuments they built. And I think that is a very, here's my response to that. I agree. I do agree that, you know, in the conspiracy diaspora that is today, there are so many problematic beliefs and you know, unfortunately, racist people out there. So I do not want to undercut the fact that these theories can sometimes be used in really harmful ways. Like that's a really, you know, obviously a valid point. However, I will say that when it comes to ancient astronaut theory in particular, I do think that critique is kind of is a little bit unfounded, because the actual indigenous mythology and culture, you know, if you actually go to and talk to the people who are the, you know, generations and generations of oral storytelling, and, you know, they're like, these are their beliefs. They believe that, you know, the Sky Brothers came down and did this stuff. And I think that ancient astronaut theory actually is saying that these ancient cultures and indigenous cultures were more advanced than we are today, because they did have contact. You know, according to this theory, they actually did have contact, right? Whereas we are not having that today. So a bunch of Western archaeologists come along and say, oh no, like, don't say that aliens built that, you know, you built that. And they're like, well, actually, our mythology, our history says that, you know, we had contact, and now you're coming along and saying, no, you built that. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up as because that's something that a lot of people often ask about this. And so with that, I want to pause here at the end of the kind of ancient civilizations part of this and see what questions there might be, if any. Do you want to hand me that if that's,
I don't think it's ready for this section.
okay.
This should be later for something.
Okay, any other questions, or if you are on Zoom, feel free to drop anything in the chat. Oh wow, there's a lot of chat
It's
messages.
okay. I'm on the
Okay,
chat.
okay.
I'm on the chat. We're some of the folks on the Zoom are having trouble not seeing the full screen. So
Uh-oh,
I'm recommending some ideas.
please, what can we do?
Maybe help.
Is it this thing that I can move around?
No, it's my impression.
Okay, oh yeah.
So
Well, if there is anything specifically, let me know. Maybe Josh, you can help me.
yeah, I'll
to
be
keep up with
monitoring the
this.
chat and I'll take
Okay.
care of it. You just
Okay.
keep doing
Thank
this
you.
awesome work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
So like maybe like can you define exactly what the ancient astronaut theory is? I've heard multiple ideas where it's like there's one idea that, you know, like, should I have a Zoom thing? Oh, my question is like defining exactly what the ancient astronaut theory is, because I've heard some ideas of like, oh, ancient civilizations have contact with extraterrestrials. I've also heard the idea that they descend from extraterrestrials, and like a lot of these indigenous like people, like their ancestors came from other planets, and like so. And I wonder if you wanted to like speak to that, like, do we have alien DNA, like that kind of thing. So
Do we have alien DNA? Oh, cool. Okay, there's two. Well, in the beginning of the question, I think that the ancient astronaut theory is something that, like, what I was going to basically wrap up this whole section by saying is that the ancient past is speculative. Even mainstream archaeology, whatever we can't actually, chemically prove, like everything is speculation. And a lot of what is going on, even in mainstream archaeology, is speculation. So there's no, until we get the time machine going, there's no, real good answer of like, this is what happened. The theory in general, the general idea that extraterrestrials came and influenced or messed around with humans in some way, there's probably a million different interpretations of exactly what that means. So if there are certain groups that are claiming to have been actually descended from them, I wouldn't be able to speak. I would say if that is their belief and they have evidence to support that, that's compelling to them, then I support that for them, But in terms of the actual DNA, do we have alien DNA? There are different things that people look at. And one of the theories that I've seen out there is that people with O negative blood maybe are like, there's certain things, something happened with the blood type that people think, and there's something like an RH indicator of a blood type, and then people who are like RH something, which I haven't looked very, very deeply into this theory, but I do know that is something that I've heard people talk about, is that the blood types can be an indication of how closely you are. But I've also heard like the whole idea of the Anunnaki is that they came and had a group of humans who were indigenous, or they came to Earth and genetically messed around with the indigenous primates of Earth, and that created Homo sapiens. So that's what some people believe, that the Anunnaki were the first extraterrestrials. They actually came and like created humanity. So if you ask people who subscribe to that theory, they would say that we all have alien DNA. So yeah.
I've got a question
Yep.
from the chat. So this is from our friend Edmund. He says, why do we often view the past, particularly the Stone Age, as a credible source of knowledge rather than focusing solely on the latest and greatest modern discoveries? This is a fundamental question about why information from the past is sometimes considered more valuable than contemporary knowledge. Can you speak to that?
I think that's a wonderful question, and I agree with you. In fact, I think that I'm getting that. Oh, sorry. Okay, there we go. I think that is one of the most frustrating things about this part of the extraterrestrial, conspiracy landscape is this stuff of the ancient past. It's just anybody's ball game. Which of these researchers are you going to look at? So for me, my approach to that problem is to look at as much information as possible. I try to look at everybody's opinions, whether or not they're somebody who's within the mainstream archaeological scholastic community, or there's somebody who calls himself an alternative researcher. I look at as much information as possible. But I agree with that sentiment in general of let's get to the hard scientific facts, let's get to the more modern stuff. So we're actually that's a perfect segue to move into the next section here. Okie dokie. So quickly I wanted to talk about, this is about contact. And so there's a little bit of a definition moment here of the different kinds of contact. So you probably heard of Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Very famous movie, little boy talks to aliens, big ship comes, scary. Oh my God, it whatever it is. You guys know what I'm talking about. Yeah, something like that. Oh, don't. That's it, exactly. He had it on the money. Yeah. So that's the third kind, right? That's meeting face-to-face encounter with the ET entity. And that is kind of what people think. And then you don't really hear much about the other kinds, right? So I won't read through all of them, but this is kind of the breakdown of, this. So when you're seeing a UFO, if you can see the shape of the UFO, then you've had a close encounter of the first kind. So if you can see that the craft is like an ice cream cone shaped craft, or a cigar shaped craft, then you've just had a first encounter. If you're just seeing a moving light that's kind of crazy, I don't think that qualifies, although I still think that's pretty cool. And then of the second kind, that's when you get like crop circles, radar, if somebody's seeing something on radar, like we had that military released footage of the blurry, the Tic Tac. If you guys saw the viral Tic Tac video, that would be considered close encounter of the second kind. And so this fifth one, human initiated contact, which they call CE5, this is something that's come out only in the past, probably less than 10 years. And it's all coming from a guy named Dr. Stephen Greer. And he is the biggest proponent of CE5. And there's an app for it, which will play little tones that will help you make contact. And so if you guys want to look into this, you can look up CE5 protocol or Dr. Greer, Greer. So yeah, I just wanted to have this here. And now we will jump into, okay, here's some more salt for you guys, because this next section about World War II, I'm going to cover it really quick at a high level, but I always find, for a long time when I first started looking into this stuff, I kind of avoided this area because, I just felt like, geez, this is already problematic enough that I'm, looking into if aliens built the pyramids. So now we're talking about, Nazis and all this stuff. So just wanted to say, this is a very contentious space and area of the landscape here. So here's another big grain of salt for you guys. So, okay, here's a bunch of text, and I may not read all of this, but just to kind of talk about this at a high level, what people sort of believe was happening with World War II. And again, all the beliefs vary very much, but they think that Hitler got really kind of obsessed with this thing called a secret society called the Brill Society, right? Which was a cult society that was focused on supernatural forces. And there was this lady, Maria Orchek, I think, or Orchek, something. Orchek? Yeah. Okay. And she, had an influence. And so Hitler gets Hitler like goes down the rabbit hole. And then all of a sudden he starts ordering his troops to go and do these big, basically raiding and desecrating these archaeological sites all over the place. So these are some of the ones that we've confirmed that we know he went to, and we know that he took stuff. And then we have confirmed that he sent expeditions to Sweden, Tibet, and Bolivia, but we don't exactly know like where exactly he went or whatever, but we know that he sent expeditions to these places. So, and this is sort of early in the war when Hitler was not, feeling the burn yet. He was sending people all over. He was sending big expeditions to go and raid these archaeological sites. And there's different reasoning or explanation of why he might have been doing this. But one of the main theories is that he was looking for advanced technology. He was looking for proof of the superiority and ancient weapons, Holy Grail, all this stuff. So he was looking for something. He seemed to be sort of enamored by these ideas of this advanced stuff, or it was whatever. So it was capturing his mind. And through these secret societies and some of the other secret societies that he was allegedly connected to at this time were the Illuminati and the Rosicrucians, the Thule. I'm not sure if it's Thule or.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. The Order of the Black Sun. So these are also different avenues of research that you guys can look into if you're interested. There's rabbit holes in every direction here. And so people theorize that some of these secret societies ultimately somehow put him in contact with extraterrestrials who may have been any of these three groups, which we won't go into these different groups too much, but these are three kind of types of extraterrestrials that people talk about a lot. The Nordics are basically tall white people who look like they look like Nordic. The tall whites are actually they look alien. They're tall white. Like if you imagine a gray alien that's like 8 feet tall and has like white skin, like they have like the alien type face. And then the Draco reptilian are like if you've ever heard of, shape-shifting reptilians that are infiltrating our government, that's the Draco reptilian. So people tie the Nazis back to these three extraterrestrial groups. So, and another big thing about the conspiracies that go into World War II are about the Nazis getting anti-gravity technology. And so there's kind of three different big buckets here. First, this got cut off. Oops. But this, I think, was 1936. The Nazis kidnapped or coerced. It seemed like, so there's this guy, Victor Schauberger, who was a scientist who was experimenting with vortexes in water. And he was studying the way that fish move through water and create vortexes with their things. And he was trying to design this engine based on these vortexes. And then he started working with the Nazis. Then he kind of got away from the Nazis. And then he was like, oh no, I wasn't working with them. They kidnapped me. But people are kind of like, okay, we don't know. Maybe he was kidnapped, whatever. Either way, people theorize that this repulsing engine that he was building ultimately was leveraged into the D Glock, which is known as the Nazi Bell, which is this right here. It was supposedly one of the first anti-gravity craft, which then was iterated and iterated and iterated. And the main source from this is that there were reports from this concentration camp that they were testing the bell next to the concentration camp, and people would see, and they called it the bell because it would make a really loud ringing noise, and potentially they got sick. But I will kind of disclaimer all this by saying that this theory of the bell comes from basically two sources when you track it down. So I wouldn't really, necessarily consider that to be a really strong thing. So as with everything I'm saying, you can look into it if you're interested, and take everything with a grain of salt. The last thing is the Foo Fighters, which I didn't even know was not just that band until I looked into this. And so the Foo Fighters were these unexplained lights that would appear during Allied raids, and they would follow the planes around. There were multiple sightings of the Foo Fighters from Allied pilots, and I think it was later in the war. It wasn't right at the beginning of the war, if I'm remembering correctly. But so, and they kind of always said, oh, that must be what we're hearing. We're hearing reports of the Germans having advanced technology. This must be the Germans. You know, we keep seeing these lights, but then there were never any reports of the lights actually doing anything except for kind of flying around. So it's not really clear exactly, but just thought I'd bring that up. And if you didn't know that that was the origin of the Foo Fighters, that is what it's from. And it was, I remember looking into why they were called that, and it was a trend at the time to call somebody foo, to call something foo that was like that's fooey almost. And so a cartoonist heard of the report of this and called them, oh, the Foo Fighters, you know, because they're not doing anything, they're bad at fighting, you know, but we're seeing them, so they're the Foo Fighters. So it was all from this cartoonist who reported on this is the and coined the term. Okay, so this is the last part about World War II. There's these two kind of general ideas that I'll give you. These are also big things that people talk about in this space. The first is Project Paperclip, and these are both well documented U.S. operations or like projects that happen. These are not speculation. So Project Paperclip was a way for the U.S. to get as much of the German brain power as possible after the war. We basically got 1,600 German scientists, mostly specializing in rocket propulsion, weaponry, aviation, and biological chemical warfare. Like that's how many we got, and we just brought them over, and they became U.S. citizens with no repercussions of their actions. And just were kind of absorbed into U.S. society. The most famous is Werner von Braun, who eventually became the head of NASA. Was just a total Nazi.
You know what year that was?
That he worked for NASA, and then he became the head like later. But he, right after World War II, he like went straight in, and he like was a founding member of NASA. Then he became the head of NASA. I don't know exactly how, but like years later. So yeah, Project Paperclip, it's also referenced in like Marvel movies. If you start looking into these things and then you watch the Marvel movies, you'll see that there's a ton of little references to these things, which is so interesting to me. And then Operation High Jump is also an interesting one. So the war ended in 1945, and then pretty much shortly after, we sent our entire naval contingent and a significant number of like aircraft carriers and planes. We sent a bunch of guys down to Antarctica. And the whole idea was that in the year after, as soon as the war ended, we are still hunting down Nazis. Then we find this U-boat. We hear rumors about Nazis escaping to Argentina, which did happen. And actually, Argentina has 1/5 of Argentina's population today are descended from Germans. And so we captured a U-boat, and the soldiers on that U-boat said, or after much torture probably, they went down to Antarctica. And we do have documentation showing that when Hitler was sending a bunch of people out to Tibet and Sweden and stuff, he also sent people to Antarctica. So we hear from these two U-boat soldiers, okay, they like Nazis, we went to Antarctica, please stop torturing us, you know. Then that's when the Secretary of Defense, the guy, James Forrestal, he ordered everybody to go down. We were supposed to be there for 6 to 8 months to map Antarctica. It's like, oh yeah, we're gonna go, and like, it's really important for us to send you know, thousands and thousands of troops down to Antarctica right now to map it. And then after a few weeks, we like came back. this reasoning was like, well, the weather was bad. It's like, oh, it was colder in Antarctica. So anyways, this is a big thing that, and then after people returned, there were accounts of soldiers. I think there's like 2 or 3 soldiers that are talked to, or that share with newspapers about what they saw, and they talk about flying saucers, and that we basically got our butt kicked down there. And then when Admiral Byrd came back, it was a weird. He talked to somebody in on his way back up, like in South America. I forget if it was in Brazil or something. He talked to somebody while he was still in South America and gave this kind of report that was like, we need to be like wary of, things that can fly super fast. And he gave this really weird cagey sort of newspaper report, and you guys can look it up, or it's pretty easy to find this report. But anyways, and then later James Forrestal also then was institutionalized, and so like things just didn't end well for anybody involved with this operation. And and then he committed suicide, and there's this whole theory of, oh, he was killed and all this stuff. Anyways, so yeah, okay, now we've gotten through World War II. I know that part's not as fun, but I think I'll stop here again for any questions on that part. Yeah.
So in this slide,
Mm-hmm.
in the slide that talked about why Hitler was getting really into these things, I mentioned that he was trying to find proof of like Aryan supremacy. The word Aryan has been tripping me up a lot when I think about these kind of things, because my understanding is that Hitler was talking about the word Aryan from a very like, actually, I don't know fully what Hitler was talking about, but but I know that I kept seeing the word Aryan all over the place when I was getting into theosophy. And like my understanding is that theosophy potentially sees the word Aryan differently from, and potentially like in the UFO world, Aryan might mean something different as well. I want to see if you have more understanding of like the different ways that what Aryan can mean. I think it's like one of the, is it a root, Josh, is it a root race? Is it a sub-root race? One of those things?
Yeah. I mean, I could speak to that. Yeah, Blavatsky uses Aryan to describe the peoples who founded the Vedic tradition. So it would be a precursor to Europeans and a precursor to, Western populations. So it more is linked to what we would now call like Indo-European populations. And the term was co-opted by the Nazis. They use a similar idea in that the Aryans were more spiritually advanced than previous generations. But when it gets into the Nazi world, they use that same sort of idea of advancement, but apply it to blonde-haired, blue-eyed people.
Yeah, because the Aryans you're talking about would be brown.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, because now Aryan is completely a racist, like, oh, white supremacy hating.
Oh, well, this is wonderful. Yeah, so this is great. Thank you so much, Ansel. Ansel dropped this in the chat. The word Aryan has roots in Sanskrit, meaning noble one. So yeah, Hitler definitely got that wrong. We also have another question from the chat. What are your thoughts on the possibility that we are dealing with civilizations so advanced that from their perspectives, we appear as primitive monkeys? In other words, is the gap in knowledge and consciousness between us and them so vast that we struggle to comprehend their technology? Observations suggest that UAPs possess extraordinary technologies capable of manipulating gravity and inertia, effectively defying the known laws of physics. Given that Einstein's theory links gravity with space and time, could these technologies allow them to warp the very fabric of reality itself? This level of mastery over propulsion, energy, and even dimensions beyond our comprehension challenges everything we know about the universe. Considering these immense capabilities, what might motivate such a civilization to communicate with us at all?
Okay. So really quick, before I dive into that question, let me just go back to this slide here, because I think I forgot to mention that this I think that what she was saying about the Aryan stuff, like it's all kind of tied up because Blavatsky was into the Vril society. So it sounds like it sort of had a common point of origin of the words, the use of the word Aryan and Vril and everything. And then Blavatsky went one way with it and Hitler went another way with it. But they were both kind of tied up in the same concepts. But yeah, obviously totally different outcomes. So with your question, let me look at this so that I'm making sure I can see it here. Okay, so the first, I'm going to take this in parts. Actually, I'm going to work from the backwards. Okay, I think I'm understanding your question. So generally, first of all, when we're talking about extraterrestrials and in general, it's really easy, especially in the beginning when you're first getting acquainted with these topics, to be like the aliens, you know, like who are the aliens? Why are they here? When really, unfortunately, it's never been as simple as just one group. Like maybe back when the Anunnaki first got here, it was just the one group, but ever since then, if not even before then, we've been dealing with multiple groups of aliens. And just like people, everybody has their own different motivations and reasons why they're here. So for example, yes, maybe most of the entities and species that we're dealing with are much more advanced than us. But that does not necessarily mean that they all have the same motivation. Like just because maybe me as a human, if I was a super advanced extraterrestrial, and then I'm like, what's my motivation to go and help out a bunch of monkeys? Well, we work with monkeys all the time because we're researching monkeys. Maybe I want to research the genetic things of monkeys, right? Mm-hmm.
All the way to the bottom. Nancy has a good point there.
Exactly. Or so maybe I'm researching the monkeys. Maybe I want to help the monkeys for you know, to give the monkeys a better life. Maybe I want to, you know, abduct the monkeys because I'm trying to make monkey soup, you know, whatever. There's there's all different motivations and reasons. And I think what's really a big you know, thing to wrap your brain around is like, it's not just one of those motivations, like it's multiple motivations. There are the people who want to make monkey soup, and there are the people who want to be benevolent, and there are the ones who don't really care one way or another, but they're just trying to study us. And there are motivations that we don't understand at all. Yeah. It's all the above. So I wish it was a nice clean answer, but it's not. I hope that speaks to your question. Any other questions before we move on? That was kind of the only one I saw there in the chat for now, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty, we will continue on to the fun part. Okay, now for the most famous extraterrestrial incidents of all time. So right here in Washington State in 1947, 2 years after the end of the war, the term flying saucer was coined, which people don't know that's why we have the Space Needle. It's literally called the Space Needle, you guys. It's was built because the word flying saucer was coined right here in Washington. Basically what happened, this guy, Kenneth Arnold, he was a private pilot. He was flying from, I think, Chehalis, Washington to Yakima. And he was going for a business trip, gets up there, flies around. He takes a detour close to Mount Rainier because there's a downed Navy or Marine Corps plane. And so there's a big reward for it. So he's like, I'll go a little closer to Mount Rainier. Looks around for a while, doesn't see it. Getting back on track, that's when he sees I think it was 9. It's either 7, 9 crescent shaped lights. At first he thinks he's, you know, seeing a reflection. So he chips his wings a little. He adjusts his glasses. He's like, are those geese? What are those? He goes through everything it could possibly be. Then he sees them start to make a controlled turn, and he is like, wait a minute, this is not, you know, those are not geese, you know. So he actually lands and he doesn't really seek out much. He tells his story to a few pilot friends and they encourage him to go and talk to some local newspapers. And he all this time is he assumes that it's a military, experimental military plane. And he thinks that by sharing his story, then the military will come forward and explain what's happening. But that's not what happens at all. The military is totally, you don't know what, and you're probably a liar, and, you know, completely denying. And he's like, you know, that's weird. And so this is a huge, sweeps the nation, everybody, oh my gosh. And he describes them as flying saucers. Later, he would kind of say, oh, well, maybe they were more crescent shaped or they were actually like a disc, but the term flying saucers really catches on, and that is the origin of the flying saucer thing. So you'll see that is June 24th, 1947. Less than 2 weeks later, Roswell, New Mexico happens. And you may have heard of Roswell. Roswell, New Mexico is now famous for this event. It's the thing that put Roswell on the map. If you've ever been there, everything is alien themed. It is crazy. Everything is alien themed in Roswell these days. So basically what happened is there's farmers reports, or I don't know if they're farmers or ranchers or landowners report seeing something fall into their land. And it's widely seen and it's reported in the newspaper the next day. And then their government goes completely full denial mode and, you know, has this whole kind of thing of, hey, look at this tinfoil, and it was all a weather balloon. And even to this day, if you look on Wikipedia, it says, oh, a military weather balloon happened. But there's a lot of, when you go into Roswell, people have a lot of different variety of beliefs about what exactly happened. Some people think that the entities that were found inside, a lot of people think that there were entities found inside, because that's one of the reports that was kind of widely seen, was like the ranchers came up and saw these people, and then another soldier came and said, oh, well, when we were covering the craft and there were bodies inside. Some people think that those bodies were like people think that the Greys are not actually biological entities, but they're actually kind of like robots, clone bodies. So some people think that they were not real living things, but they were more like robot things. Some people think that one of the bodies was alive and they took it and they actually communicated with it for years. And that entity is called EBEN, EBEN, extraterrestrial biological entity. And so there's lots of accounts of everything we learned from EBEN, and EBEN survived for, 5 years or whatever it was. And then eventually he died from his injuries, but he taught us all this stuff. People speculate that this was the origin of fiber optic technology, and that we got all this stuff from it. So there's a lot of different theories and speculation into Roswell specifically, because this is the most famous UFO thing of all time. So next, on to Betty and Barney Hill. This is the most famous alien abduction story of all time, the most well documented, or I don't know if it's the most well documented, but it's the most widely publicized alien abduction story of all time. Betty and Barney Hill were basically driving home late one night when they see what they think is a plane light. Then the light starts following them for a while, and it kind of like goes in front of them a little bit, and then it follows them from behind a little bit, and they're kind of like, what? We don't know what's going on, but they keep driving. Then the thing comes in front of them, and basically it's a big craft that they can see, and it stops like right on the road in front of them. And it's a large saucer shaped craft, as you can see here, and they can actually see the window and they can see different entities inside. Barney gets out and gets his pistol and like kind of is like, I don't know what's going to happen right now. But then he gets really scared when he gets out and gets closer. So he runs and gets back in his car. That's when they start hearing this buzzing noise. And then next thing they know, they're driving home. They get back to their house and things are, neither of their wristwatches work ever again. Their clothes are torn. Barney had a pair of binoculars that the leather strap was ripped, and had no memory of ripping it. Betty's dress was like torn, his shoes were scuffed, all this stuff. Barney says that he, like, the first thing he wanted to do when he got home was go and like check on his privates to make sure, because that was his first instinct of like, I need to go and like make sure everything's okay downstairs right now. So they're kind of like, you know, whatever. They're also, Betty's dress is covered in a fine pink powder. And their car has these weird circles on the trunk, which when they take a compass close to them, it's like has an electromagnetic feedback on these circles. So everything's okay, really. And then the next couple days, then Betty starts having these very vivid dreams, which then motivate her to go to the press and basically start trying to figure out what happened. And their story is widely publicized. It's also notable that during this time, them being a mixed race couple was sort of like, that was part of the reason why the story got so big, was because it was like, well, look at this perfectly fine couple and they're mixed race. What do you know? And so that's also just something that's often noted with this story, is that that was one of the reasons why it was so largely publicized. And these are depictions that they worked on. I mean, and then the rest of their lives, they were, you know, this was their lives. They pretty much devoted their entire lives to this experience that they had. And I think that this right here is something that Betty actually created.
Would you describe that?
Oh yeah. Let's see if I can actually, I'll just zoom in on it here. Let's see if I can get to, oops, no spoilers. Here we go. This is a very bad image, you guys, sorry. But
Oh, that's much, yeah.
yeah, so it's like a paper mache. And then here is another one that I think is a drawing that she worked together to produce. Okay, so now, and maybe I'll move us over here. Hopefully that'll help. Okay, so now moving on to crop circles, my personal favorite part of this whole thing. Oh yeah.
I felt the film that they did with James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons is worth noting as a significant film, far beyond the all kind of over dramatized Hollywood of say Close Encounters, but
yeah,
for whatever.
third kind, yeah.
Yes, that's my opinion. For some reason, I felt like I needed to tell you that.
I'm gonna drop
Please,
that in.
yes, I was gonna say that would be great. I'd love to check that out.
I will find out and I will let us know.
Yeah. There's a lot of great documentaries too. I mean, people more and more these things are coming out.
Somehow they were able to do it in a dramatic way without
Mhm.
documentary.
Yeah.
Well done.
Well, they're also one of the most credible. Like when you see them actually speak on the topic, it's like they're not, you know, they were just living their lives and this happened to them and they were traumatized by the experience. This is not two people, like that was part of the sensation too, of like, look at these totally normal people who have just had their lives completely changed by what has happened to them, you know? So that's why they're considered it's one of the most credible abduction cases of all time. So moving on to crop circles, this is the first ever published crop circle here, was in 1678, and they called it the Mowing Devil. And there's also possibly earlier accounts of like this guy who was a cardinal in the church who was going around, and he like briefly investigated, and I'm trying to remember his name. I was going to note it here, but I couldn't remember. But so there's various accounts maybe earlier, but the entire crop circle phenomenon really took off in the 60s and 70s, and there were thousands of crop circles documented. I mean, all over the world, but many, many, many in the UK. And so these are kind of, this is just a screenshot of some cool ones that are relatively more recent. But I'm gonna kind of zoom in on a couple of the the really cool ones. This one is called the Chill Bolton reply. So this was a this here is a binary code that we sent out as a part of our first ever attempt to make contact with extraterrestrials. We sent this out as a way, as an introduction. It's called the Arecibo message. And we say, you know, basically what this says is like, here's our sun, and here's 1, 2, 3. This is our planet here, and we look like this. And here's our DNA is got 2 strands, and I forget what this part means, but it's all part of an introduction of us as humans, right? So then this crop circle comes up. It's in 2001 in Hampshire, which is actually where the mowing devil was, incidentally, right next to a big radio telescope there. And this comes back. And if you're interested, you can look up what all of the stuff is here, but you can see that they've got a similar thing. They follow our same process here, and there's them with the big head and the short body, right? And they show, okay, here's our planet and whatever. So this was kind of a big made a big splash when it happened. The next one is this one, which is called the Crabwood Circle, also in the UK. This is probably the most famous crop circle of all time. Yeah. And this is a binary code, and this is the message of the binary code. This part, we oppose deception, has been highly talked about, and oh, they're saying that, you know, they want the governments to tell us and blah, blah, blah. You know, so just thought I'd share this one. This is kind of a big crop circle.
Will you read that out loud?
Sure. Oh man, I'm sorry, it's so small. Here, I'll zoom in on it too, so that we can.
I know you got the crop circles actually have messages.
Oh yeah, and yeah, I'll show you some of the other ones too in that other picture. So yeah, beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain, but still time. Believe there is good out there. We oppose deception. Conduit closing, bell sound. I don't know how the bell sound goes through in binary code. I was looking at it and I was like, maybe like this last, because I think it reads from outside to inside, and maybe this last thing is like maybe.
Wait, do you know exactly what a binary code is?
Binary code is 0s and 1s. No,
No, it's the code that underpins all the computers.
Yeah,
All the
0s and
computation
1s.
is 0 and on and off.
Yeah.
Just like all the particles.
There you go. Yeah,
Mhm.
you got it.
Yeah. So
when was the- is that 2000?
this is 2002. Yep. And another, so that's actually like a very clear, you know, that's an actual coded message. But with a lot of these other ones, you'll see like sometimes what's encoded is more like geometric principles, or there's some that have been that, like this is the Platonic solids, you know, there's different ideas that are sometimes encoded. There's another one, this one might be a molecule of some type, like I know that they've done molecules. I don't have these really labeled, but there's a lot of different kind of things that they can encode geometrically.
That one that you identify as being the most significant one, the second most significant one is the one with the basket weave. You don't have it there, but it's just absolutely astounding.
You mean with the wheat actually layered?
I don't know how to
Oh.
describe it, but it was.
Yeah.
Things
You'll have to show me. Yeah. What is interesting about these two is that like you're seeing it from a high level, but sometimes when people, first of all, when people report actually walking into these things, it's like they go into a vortex, or people have, you know, sometimes people actually get visions, and you know, so there's all these sort of stories of, oh my God, I went in the crop circle and I, you know, had this amazing feeling, like you can feel the energy of the space. And then also the wheat, or whatever the crop is, can actually be like layered, you know, like you'll have like 5 layers of folded wheat on top of each other. And also they've shown when it grows out, like when the wheat continues to grow, and then the spot of, there will be like a node or like a mark on the spot where it was at the ground when it happened. So there's all these different, you know, things, and that's all encounters the second kind, right? That trace evidence that comes from contact.
Somebody put the story, the basket
Oh, really?
thing, yeah. The farmer that was in the neighborhood, that don't get me on the precise details.
Yeah, let's wait until.
Right.
question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
No worries. Okay. So I think we're almost right to the end here. Just wanted to call out another couple things for you to look at. Here, let me just make this small. There we go. Hopefully you guys can see that. If you want to take a screenshot, or I can make these slides available at the end. But these are for more of the most famous incidents of all time. This one is interesting. The Rendlesham. This is like the Roswell outside of America. This is a really, really famous one. And what happened is they saw lights in the sky. Then the soldiers go into the forest, or the guys, I forget if they're soldiers or what. They are soldiers. Yeah. And they see a big black triangular craft, and the guy touches it, and then he starts like seeing later, he starts writing binary code, and he's like gets a really, I just need to write right now. And then he writes a long code, and it's 001100101, you know, and he does it for a really long time. And I can't remember exactly what the message is, but it's interesting. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so many stories like that. It's very interesting. You'll have to look into it. The Rendlesham Forest incident. And he is also, I've seen documentary footage of the guy talking about it, and, you know, just a regular dude who was just living his life. You know, that's how these things go. And oh man, we're already like over time. Sorry, you guys. Okay, I think we're right at the end. So the last section of just kind of what do people believe today, just wanted to generally, this is the last slide, but you know, there's still whistleblowers who are coming forward all the time and telling their story and their experiences of what they say that happened. These are just a few of them. There's a lot of different guys, and you can, and I, you know, I would just, you have to make your own decisions about these people. But there's definitely interesting information that they're bringing forward. A lot of people in this space, especially if they've had an experience that has convinced them that it's real, like if they've had a contact experience and then they start looking into this stuff and they find out that, you know, the government is basically denying that all this exists, it ultimately results in many people believe that the government does know about this stuff and maybe even has had direct contact. A lot of people point to Eisenhower as the guy who was the first guy to have contact in 1954. He apparently met some people face to face and hammered out some sort of a deal, which then, it's interesting if you listen to Eisenhower's last like speech as he's leaving office. He says, beware the dangers of the military industrial complex, the powers from within our own military industrial complex, like beware. And then he's like, I'm out, you know. Sorry. may have screwed us there, but careful. Yeah, so, and then another common belief is this idea of the Galactic Federation. Some people call it the Galactic Federation of Worlds. Some people call it the Galactic Federation of Light. Some people think that those are two different things or that they're the same thing. But basically, it's like the Star Trek Federation of planets or worlds, whatever. And that they are working with us and possibly working with our government to kind of prepare humanity for this big disclosure. So just a few last sources for you guys. These are all like aggregator sources. These 4 websites are all people who have pulled together a whole bunch of different sources. So so it's not the actual like direct sources that I used for the specific stuff, but I just wanted to put these 4 websites as if you do want, you know, rabbit holes to dive down. These are 4 places that you can go.